We are going to have the clip of spin. This is going to be Avery and Corbin. Avery has been taught how to do a spin. She will turn in a circle. What we're adding on is that the child will offer a visual cue. So with the hands on the chest, it keeps the dog from thinking it has anything to do with the hands. It gives them a precursor to this behavior. We're going to turn around. Avery does her spin. And then you're going to see a little party and a reinforcer. And Corbin's going to give a reinforcer. Avery has already learned how to do this spin. We taught it with hand targets and lures. And we taught it, you'll see in that faded, you will see that I give a faded cue if Avery doesn't quite catch the behavior that Corbin's doing. You'll see me standing in the background, helping her out just a little bit. There you go. Corbin's going to spin. Avery's taking a look. I'm helping her out. And there you go. You have a dog doing a nice spin for the child. Good. Well, you can tell that most of these games Corbin really enjoys, right? So they are great examples of fun games that you can do with the dog. As we started out this segment, we did say that Avery already knew how to do a spin. I came to the table for this video with Avery knowing how to do a spin. The new part of it was taking the cue from the child. Mm-hmm.
So, and then she mentioned in the video, but teaching the spin, that's like using a food lure, using your hand target as a guide, and the dogs can learn it pretty quickly. And then you just, using your hand as a lure, you kind of go smaller, smaller, smaller and fade it out so that you don't need to be guiding them the whole time.
Right. So you saw me in the background where I could kind of get her attention, and I was just doing a very small, very similar to this, just a very small hand cue. And she was taking that. She can also go off of a verbal, but she was kind of looking from both of us a little bit. And I truly believe that after some time with different children, that you'd need to do that less and less. They would actually take that cue from the child, because they're going to see that as a visual cue.
Well, because then the child becomes the cue. So the hands up like this then becomes the cue, and your hand target is completely gone.
Is completely gone. Yes.
What does it mean to fade out a cue?
What is it? Do you want to start with that?
Basically, well, it's making it smaller and smaller. So as you saw with Amy in the card game, she started with her hand, and so Avery was targeting her hand, and then she went to 2 fingers, and then she went to 1 finger, and then she was moving her hand back away from the card. So then she doesn't even need her hand on the card anymore, and now the card becomes the cue.
I often think about fading a cue, like if we're talking really loud and then we start to whisper and whisper and whisper. So it's less information, right? So in the beginning, I was doing, I was leading Avery completely around in a circle, and then less and less and less. So I had that on board. And if any of you are interested in doing this behavior, then maybe we just have to break down and show you how the spin is trained and how to do that, because fading a cue is something that we do with all sorts of things. It goes with all of them so that we don't have to do a huge overt cue. As an example is a crosswalk button. You walk up and you just give the dog the cue, and you don't have to put a hand target on the crosswalk button, right? They have learned that environmental cue of that. So we've faded our body out. We've made it less and less and less. That was a very good question.
Out of all the new cues that you taught the dogs, which one is your favorite?
Just for these videos or in the entire world? I don't know. I really like the mat just because the dogs really enjoy it. I mean, it's a fun thing, and they, and it's pretty pleasing to everybody. It's a very cute and useful and versatile behavior to use anywhere at any time.
Right. Yeah, that's a fun one that all the dogs enjoy. And we train it to most all the dogs now, because when we started it, we saw how much that they liked it. And then we started to see different ways. I mean, right here, you have Corbin doing the mat roll out. So you have a child, but then you have Taco doing it with the firefighters, and so you got the big guys, he's bringing in and he's joining the guys for their workout. So it can be used in any kind of a venue. So that's really fun. I really like the spin myself. I like to train it because it's a fun behavior to train, and it works on different things that I have to do, changing of cues, fading of cues, like we said right there. It is really something that the dog and child can do. Kids like to move, right? So a lot of times you need to get that energy out of a child in a good way, in an interactive way with the dog, and they can be moving and wiggling and doing these things. And then later you have your quiet interactions that you need with a dog, but letting them get their wiggles out first, the children and the
I
dogs
was gonna say, and the dogs too.
and the
Yeah.
dogs too, then that's a really to your advantage. And so I like this behavior so much because of that.
What behavior do you find the most challenging in general?
I think impulse control is really challenging because we work with such young dogs. They like to move. They like to
Mhm.
wiggle, and and we're working with food and we're working with movement to try to get them to be still and to not be listening to every impulse in their brain telling them to do something else. It's challenging to get them to just have a place of quiet.
Mhm. I think out of the behaviors that we showed, the most challenging one for me personally would be the ball push,
Mhm.
because they see the ball as a toy as well, right? So you're not only looking as trainers, it's kind of a funny concept, but we're not just looking for what we want the dog to do, but we're trying to pay attention like, oh, I don't want him to paw the ball. I
Bite
don't
the
want him to
ball.
bite the ball.
Mhm.
There's all these other things. So you're really looking for what you want, which is actually just touch the ball with your nose.
Mhm.
And so that's why we have learned through experience what size ball, what kind of ball, and having the tape on the ball really helps because that gives a visual. So you've got an actual target kind of sticker to
Mhm.
go to. And what I've done to help with that, to help fade out some of those things, is actually I just hold the ball up. So the dog is kind of walking toward it and touches it, but then it kind of lessens the opportunity for them to use their feet and do all those play behaviors that they want to do, because it also looks like a toy for them.
Right, because if you're holding the ball, it stays stationary, so they're
Mhm.
not getting the push and it rolls and then it becomes a moving fun object to chase.
Right.
It's just a thing to bump.
Right.
Yeah.
So because
Mhm.
of that, it makes it a harder impulse control behavior with that. That was a good question as well.
How often should you do training sessions with your dog to teach a new behavior or cue?
I mean, it depends on the dog's mood, what time of day. I don't think, you should do excessive where you don't want to get them bored. If they start to check out, you want to keep them engaged, you want to keep them excited. So it really just depends on the dog, the time of day, their mood, and how complex the behavior is.
Mhm. Most of the time, what you'll find though is that they really love it. They love the new learning. They love the new objects. And these are dogs, we go back to the thing of they have learned how to learn. So that's a huge thing that fills a great need for them mentally and physically and emotionally, is training new things, right?
Mhm.
So always keep that in mind. It also keeps you very sharp as a handler and a teacher. And many of you, whenever we do client placement training, we play the training game. So it can be a difficult thing, right? That's the game where we send one of you out of the room, and when you come in human, we're going to train you to do something. It can be very nerve-wracking. You can feel like, oh, I'm not going to be smart enough to do this. I don't know what's going to happen. And it gives you some overall real respect for the difficulty that being the learner can be. But if you are working on your training skills as a handler, and you're working on fun interactive games with a dog, many times they really want to engage in these
Mhm.
things. So it can be, remember, a training session can be 3 minutes or 4 minutes. It's really quite short. So
Mhm.
if you are in between time and you can just grab an object, or you have your different props, and you can put a session in pretty fast. We never train for a long period of time, especially a new thing. So once you make a successful step or two, we often stop and then we
Mhm.
come back to it. And so if we stop on step 5, whenever I come back to it, I may go back to step 4 or 3. We're going to
Little
make sure you
refresher.
have that little refresher,
Mhm.
and then I might go forward 2 or 3 or 4 steps.
And I think it's important too, to be really receptive of, your dog's behavior and seeing what they're telling you. If they start yawning or plopping down and acting frustrated at a certain step and they're just not getting it, make it easier for them, set them up for success. So you're always ending on a
Mhm.
good note. So, do something that they are really good at. You can go do some touches or some sits or something to get them engaged and make them feel good again. So they want to continue and keep their head in the game. Because if they just get frustrated and they feel like they're losing all the time, they're not going to want to play.
Right. That brings a good point that sometimes I hear people say, well, the dog's just being stubborn,
Mhm.
which in fact is not being stubborn. It just doesn't understand what you're asking them for. And so going back and making those small steps is really what fills it in, because obviously they're not getting enough information from you,
Mhm.
whether it's the small steps or the frequency of markers, right? Because most of the time people come out and they want the dog to do everything. Whereas we go and we say, oh, well, you know, if you want the dog to push the ball, maybe what he has to do the very first thing is just look at the ball,
Mhm.
right? And people would say, well, that's not pushing the ball. Well, it's a step toward it.
Mhm.
So
And then you
so
build.
that's part, and then you build on it.
Mhm.
And then someone asked, in what order do you fade out cues? Is it the physical cue, then the verbal cue, and then you fade out the verbal cue?
Ask me that again.
What order do you fade out cues?
Well, I would say that the dogs are not verbal creatures. They are really body creatures, body language creatures. You know, it doesn't matter what language they're learning. Trainers in different countries, we're all using different verbal cues. So they learn it because of association. There are even sometimes though that like I wouldn't even have to have gone to a verbal. I could have just gone with spinning on the hand cue for Avery
Mhm.
and then added in the child and done that. And then the child is seeing the body cue of the child.
And a lot of times dogs will, what we call jumping the prompt. And they will, you know, they see the setup and they've done this behavior enough times that they're going to do it without the cue. You know, we throw that mat down on the floor. I'd say the majority of the dogs are going to run over and lay on it
Right.
without us having to tell them anything.
Right. So we would call that environmental cue. She didn't give the verbal cue. She didn't point. She didn't do anything, but the dog sees the mat and knows that I put my belly on the mat. Something good happens afterwards.
Mhm.
I hope that answered that question.
Okay, that's all the questions.
All right. Well, we do have, how much time do we have left? About 3 minutes. So, Marcy, is there any follow-up that you would like to do after this presentation right here to complete this?
Yeah, well, definitely want to remind everybody that these wonderful training segments, which I could sit and watch all day, are available on the LMS site. So don't worry if you want to see it again, which I know I do, they're going to be available there for you. So we really want you to keep that in mind. But it was an awesome session. And if you have any other questions, those were wonderful questions. Thank you to everybody that asked a question. Those were really, really, really helpful in how to break these behaviors down and these activities. We're always looking for more fun things.